with your help and God's grace, we will continue our journey forward and remind the world just why it is that we live in the greatest nation on earth. Thank you, America. God bless you. God bless these United States.
As the nation takes in the results of last night's election, each party is bracing for the challenges ahead. I'm Megan Lieberman, live in the New York Times newsroom, and Adam Nagurney is here now with more. So, Adam, there's some open soul searching going on in the Republican Party today. I was struck by this quote from John Cornyn last night, the chairman of the Republican Senatorial Committee, saying, "We have a period of reflection and recalibration ahead for the Republican Party." And clearly they do have these sort of demographic and electoral map challenges. If Mitt Romney's 89% of his vote was the white vote, that's not a winning strategy for them.
This is something that's been building up for years now, and the Republicans have been warning about it. The immigration situation, the fact that they are perceived as being so tough on immigration has hurt them with Hispanic voters a lot. I think the president got 70% of Hispanic voters. That's a huge deal because that is the biggest growing group of voters in the country. And you've seen states begin to flip. California 10 years ago. Nevada now.
People are looking at Arizona, even in places like
Colorado,
Texas.
Right, exactly. So I think that's really, really a big deal. And their voters are older. Older people tend to die eventually, I'm just saying. Obama voters are younger, right, whiter. And whites are becoming a minority in this country. So they've got to figure out what to do. I think they have problems with women because it's the way they come across. I don't want to generalize, but the way some of them come across on abortion issues. Obviously, two guys who lost last night.
Yes, mentioning rape is just a thing that probably senatorial candidates should probably not do anymore,
And then the last issue is, and this has been building for a while, you could see it last night, is gay marriage, right? Gay marriage is an issue where there's a difference among generational cohorts. Younger people under 40, tend to not care, not even that support gay marriage, they don't care about it.
They don't get why it's an issue on some level.
So Republicans who are making an issue out of it, which a lot of them did, I think that hurts the party and makes them seem more out of touch. So what Cornyn said, and Cornyn had a really bad last night.
Yeah, they had a terrible, they were expected to really, 6 months ago, they were absolutely expected to take control
the Senate.
of the Senate.
Yeah. So he's really, really onto something. We'll see, the Republican Party might go in a lot of different directions over the next, 6 months, 2 years. You could see them going to the right, which is historically what happens when parties are hurt. Or maybe they'll begin to think we need to rethink our appeal, rethink our positions to some extent, or how we present ourselves and become a...
Do we think, speaking of rethinking their positions, do we think that this gives the president some leverage on, say, immigration, which is an issue that he clearly wants to deal with? He talked about it last night. Can the Republican Party be seen as being as hostile to Hispanics on immigration as they have been?
I think logically it should. Washington's been so weird for the past couple of years, right? So it's like you say stuff that seems very logical and then you get proven wrong. But your question is right? Any Republican who's looking at the demographic data that we just saw the absolute hostility among many Latinos, not all, but obviously many, towards the Republican Party has to start thinking we need to deal with this. The president's under pressure to deal with immigration reform, quote-unquote reform. He didn't do it last time. DREAM Act, we extended the DREAM Act for a year. I think there's a lot of pressure on Republicans and the president to try to come up with a solution. In a normal world, I would say it's going to happen, but Washington is no longer a normal world, so who knows?
And on these sort of social issues, this kind of recalibration is maybe harder than it sounds. The kind of more polarized positions, these sort of more conservative positions, have done well for Republicans in more local races, House races, state Senate races, state legislatures. But it's not working for them nationally, so there could be a real tension between those two things, right?
I don't think that issues like abortion and gay rights are issues that necessarily matter too much in state races. That's not what people think about. In national races, it is an issue. And I think you got to be careful because people have very different opinions on issues like abortion and gay rights. And I don't think there's any right or wrong. But I think it's the way you present it and how much of an emphasis you put on it. I think the way the Republicans got in trouble, or some did, was because they were very, very sort of cut and dry, black and white about abortion, like life begins at conception, no exceptions for the life of the woman. That's life of the mother. That's something that I think gives voters some pause. The birth control argument, whether or not the government should be funding birth control or allowing insurance companies to fund birth control, again, that's an issue that divides people, but I think that's an issue that really hurt them with women voters, and I think Mitt Romney was aware of that.
Thanks a lot, Adam.
Sure, thank you.
Few people have greater interest in last night's outcome than those jockeying for positions in a second Obama administration. White House correspondent Peter Baker is on the line with more. So, Peter, we are expecting a lot of prominent exits in the next few months, aren't we?
Well, that's right, exactly. Look, most second-term presidents, two-term presidents, tend to shuffle around their cabinet in between the re-election and the inauguration. Roughly about half the cabinet usually leaves, at least in modern times. President Obama looks to do roughly about the same. Big names, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton leaving, Secretary of the Treasury Tim Geithner leaving, possibly some changes at Defense or Attorney General, although it may not be right away. So a lot of Democrats out there today polishing their resumes and calling their friends in the White House.
So let's talk about Secretary of State to start. One person who's been talked about was John Kerry, who was obviously the president's sparring partner in debate practice this year. But there's some questions about whether actually Scott Brown could end up complicating that, right?
Well, that's right, exactly. Look, Senator Kerry holds a seat in Massachusetts that they would like to hold on to. Senator Brown just lost last night for re-election, but obviously would be a pretty formidable candidate if they had to have a special election to fill a Kerry seat should he be made Secretary of State. That worries a little less probably today than it might have been a couple of weeks ago or even a couple of days ago, given that the Democrats seem to not only hold on to their slim majority, but build on it by one or two seats. So that may give him a little bit more freedom to take over at state.
But there are other contenders for that job too, like potentially Susan Rice, though she's had some trouble recently in terms of the handling of the attack on the consulate in Benghazi.
Well, that's right, exactly. Susan Rice is the ambassador to the United Nations, actually seen as the front runner for Secretary of State until the attack in Benghazi. Then she was put on Sunday television and gave what turned out to be a wrong assessment of what happened there. She was reading for what she was told to say. People in the White House don't blame her for that. They say she was doing what saying what they all believed at that time. But they do recognize that that means that she has become a real focal point and a target for Republicans and might have a real battle for confirmation should they decide to send her up for Secretary of State.
How about Tim Geithner? Who do we think might be some contenders for Treasury?
Well, the most popular choice inside the White House for Secretary of Treasury would be Jack Lew. He's currently the White House Chief of Staff, previously served as Deputy Secretary of State and Director of the Office of Management and Budget. Widely respected among his colleagues, seen as a grown-up who can take over for Secretary Geithner at a very critical time in terms of the economy, in terms of the fiscal issues that confront this president heading into a re-election. There are some other possibilities, though, if the president doesn't want to lose him. He's been a pretty good Chief of Staff, according to most people who work with him. So you see other names out there, but right now Jack Lew is seen as the likeliest choice.
And do we think that the Secretary of Secretary of Defense, Leon Panetta, might leave soon, or do we think he's going to sort of he has not been there through the whole administration. Do you think he might stay on a little bit longer in that job?
Well, he was CIA director at the beginning.
Right.
He has done 4 years. He's in.
But he switched jobs in the middle.
Right, exactly. He switched jobs. He hasn't been at the Pentagon as long as all that. He is, though, in his 70s. Wants to retire. He flies home most every weekend to California, and I think is kind of tired of that kind of commute. But he's also looking ahead and seeing this big sequester issue with defense cuts. What's going to happen at the end of the year with these automatic spending cuts that are supposed to take effect? So there's some thought that he might hang on for a little bit, maybe several months or even a full year into the new term before getting ready to leave. He hasn't said publicly yet, but a lot of eyes are on that job.
Finally, Peter, what about some of the sort of insider advisors like David Plouffe or Valerie Jarrett? Do we think any of them might leave?
David Plouffe is the president's senior advisor. He's obviously one of the architects of this re-election that happened last night. Pretty much seems intent on leaving the White House now that it's over. He came in only for the last 2 years. Doesn't seem to like Washington all that much and looking forward to getting out. You could also see, though, the president putting a little pressure on him to stay. He values Plouffe's advice and his counsel, and he needs somebody at his right hand that he can really trust. Valerie Jarrett, we haven't heard from publicly on that, but she's there have been some rumors from time to time that she might leave, but at the moment, people think she's going to stick around.
Thanks, Peter. We'll be watching.
So will we. Thanks.
Lawmakers' attention will now return to the budget battles that have defined Washington politics in recent years. Will anything change after last night? Jackie Combs is here now with more. So, Jackie, the election's done, and now the fiscal cliff.
Right. One fight ends, the other starts up.
So talk about the fiscal cliff. What are these sort of series of deadlines that we're now facing?
The fiscal cliff is actually a phrase that the head of the Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke came up with, which the fact that he came up with it signifies its potential threat to the economy. It basically refers to upwards of $700 billion in automatic tax increases and spending cuts that would take effect at the turn of the year if Congress and the White House don't take certain action to reduce deficits by an alternative amount. And people might say, why is that happening? And essentially, it's the confluence of of things that have deadlines that just like the Bush tax cuts,
which were just set to
which
expire.
were set to expire on December 31st, and the payroll tax cut that we've all been enjoying, well, not all, but people with certain levels of income have been enjoying for the past 2 years as a stimulus measure. And those are set to expire. And on top of that, because in 2011 they couldn't come to a budget agreement, they said, okay, we'll give ourselves another year, and if we don't come up with one, then
automatic
this
cuts.
So-called sequester of automatic cuts will take place. So all of that together would be such a hit to the economy in its weak state that the Congressional Budget Office has said it could trigger a short recession. It doesn't have to happen. It probably won't happen, but
and we did hear a lot of sort of conciliatory talk last night about reaching across the aisle. We heard it from Mitt Romney. We also heard some from the president. Let's take a quick listen to what he had to say.
Tonight, you voted for action, not politics as usual. You elected us to focus on your jobs, not ours. And in the coming weeks and months, I am looking forward to reaching out and working with leaders of both parties to meet the challenges we can only solve together. Reducing our deficit, reforming our tax code, fixing our immigration system, freeing ourselves from foreign oil. We've got more work to do.
But Jackie, as you reported this morning, when the president actually tried to reach out to Republican congressional leaders after that speech, he didn't get so far.
Right. Well, there was some talk whether who was supposed to call whom first. You know, maybe the congressional leaders should try to call him and congratulate him. But Mr. Obama, no sooner had he given his victory speech after midnight than sometime after 1 a.m. he tried to call House Speaker John Boehner and the Republican Senate leader Mitch McConnell, and I don't know what he would have said to them, but he didn't get them because they were sleeping by then. So, as I put it in the story,
don't you wake up when the president calls? I don't know.
Yeah, I guess not. And remember back in when they were doing the budget talks in 2011, John Boehner famously didn't return the president's calls for a few days. But I think we have a new atmosphere. They've turned the page. That said, this failure to communicate won't be the last time in the next 2 months.
And we've already seen John Boehner will be speaking this afternoon. Maybe we'll hear some more
Yes.
from him on the fiscal cliff then. But he's already sort of planted a flag last night. So let's listen to what he had to say.
And in the face of a staggering national debt that threatens our children's future, our majority passed a budget that begins to solve the problem. Now, while others chose inaction in the face of this threat, we offered solutions. And the American people want solutions. And tonight, they've responded by renewing our House Republican majority.
Now, Jackie, that doesn't necessarily sound like a man who's ready to deal.
No.
But do we think that the president gets some leverage from his victory last night, particularly since exit polls showed that, and polling earlier in the year has showed that the president's positions on some of these things, like letting the Bush tax cuts for the wealthiest expire, are pretty popular.
Right. He absolutely gets leverage, and the Republicans know it, which is why you saw that even before the votes were in, Speaker Boehner and Mitch McConnell and other Republicans were drawing their lines in the sand that they were not going to raise taxes on anyone. They see that as what they call a jobs killer. Though you've had a number of business people, as we've reported, come forward and say, we'll pay higher taxes if that's a fair price for a balanced long-term deficit reduction deal. But the president does have leverage because, he got a lot of criticism for not having a very, specific agenda for what he'll do in a second term. But there was one specific that
he was very specific about
he's emphasized for over a year, and that is that the higher income Americans should pay more in taxes, that the Bush tax rates on high incomes above $250,000 a year should expire. And not only did he win election with the people knowing well his position on that, but the exit polls showed what national polls have shown, which is that upwards of about 2/3 of Americans agree with him.
Now, one sort of question of both intrigue and practicality. What role do we think Paul Ryan is going to play in any of these negotiations going forward?
Well, Paul Ryan was in a win-win situation. He wins even if he lost, which he did. He comes back to the House. He got reelected from Wisconsin. He comes back to the House, presumably as the House Budget Committee chairman. Has to be, confirmed, or the House Republicans act on it.
Seems very likely.
Yeah, he comes back with his status enhanced. And he's really was seen before, and he'll certainly be seen after as something of an ideological a leader for the House Republicans and congressional Republicans in general. Not only that, but someone who's on a short list already for the 2016 Republican presidential contenders. So he will have a lot to say, and you can bet that he's not going to be ready to compromise on taxes anytime soon, if ever. And remember, he was with two other Republicans on the Bowles-Simpson Fiscal Commission, and while all three Republicans from the Senate on that commission voted in favor of the majority recommendations, which included tax increases, Paul Ryan and his House colleagues did not.
Thanks so much, Jackie.
My pleasure.
That's all for today. We'll be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. with more on election 2012 and continued analysis on what awaits a second Obama administration. Until then, stay with us online for all things politics. I'm Megan Lieberman. Thanks for watching.